Sarah Martinez stood in front of her bedroom mirror, smoothing down her navy blue dress one final time. Today was the day she had dreamed about for 22 long years. Her son Miguel was graduating from college, and she would be there to watch him walk across that stage to receive his diploma. The single mother had sacrificed everything to make this moment possible. The morning sun streamed through her small apartment window, casting golden light across the framed photos that covered her dresser. Each picture told a story of struggle and determination. There was Miguel as a toddler, gap-toothed and grinning. Another showed him in his high school graduation cap, beaming with pride. But it was the older photo tucked behind the others that held the most meaning for Sarah. In that faded photograph, a much younger Sarah wore military fatigues and stood beside an armored vehicle in the desert. Her hair was pulled back in regulation style, and her eyes held a fierce determination that had carried her through some of the darkest moments of her life. She had been Sergeant Sarah Martinez then, serving her country with honor in a place far from home. Sarah touched the photo gently before turning away. Those days felt like a lifetime ago, yet the memories remained as sharp as broken glass. She had returned from deployment changed, carrying invisible wounds that took years to heal. The transition back to civilian life had been harder than anyone could have prepared her for. Miguel had been just 3 years old when Sarah came home from her final tour of duty. His father had left them both behind long before Sarah deployed, unable to handle the responsibility of parenthood. Sarah had raised Miguel alone, working multiple jobs to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. She cleaned offices at night, waitressed during lunch shifts, and took whatever work she could find to make ends meet. The years had been a blur of exhaustion and determination. Sarah would arrive home at dawn, wake Miguel for school, help him with homework in the afternoon, then leave for her evening job while he stayed with Mrs. Rodriguez next door. There were nights when Sarah fell asleep standing up at the sink, washing dishes in the restaurant kitchen. There were mornings when she counted coins to buy milk and bread, stretching every dollar until it screamed. But Miguel never went without what he truly needed. Sarah made sure of that. She bought his school supplies, even when it meant eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner herself. She attended every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every soccer game she could manage. When Miguel brought home report cards filled with excellent grades, Sarah felt a pride so fierce it took her breath away. The boy had inherited his mother's determination and added his own natural intelligence to the mix. He excelled in mathematics and science, spending hours at the library reading books about engineering and technology. Sarah watched him grow from a curious child into a focused young man who spoke passionately about his dreams of building bridges and designing structures that would last for generations. When Miguel announced his intention to study civil engineering at the State University, Sarah felt her heart soar and sink simultaneously. She was proud beyond words, but terrified about the cost. College tuition, books, housing, and living expenses added up to an astronomical sum that her minimum wage jobs could never cover. But Sarah had learned long ago that obstacles existed to be overcome, not accepted. She worked with Miguel to fill out scholarship applications, sitting at their kitchen table night after night, typing on an old laptop she had bought secondhand. They applied for every grant, scholarship, and financial aid program they could find. Sarah took on extra shifts and even started a small catering business on weekends, making tamales and enchiladas for neighborhood parties and celebrations. The day Miguel's acceptance letter arrived, along with notification of a partial scholarship, Sarah cried tears of joy and relief. They had done it. Her son would be the first person in their family to attend college. But even with the scholarship, money remained tight. Sarah continued working multiple jobs throughout Miguel's college years, sending him every spare dollar she could manage. There were times when Sarah's body ached so badly she could barely stand. The long hours, physical labor, and constant stress took their toll. Her back, injured during her military service, often sent shooting pains down her legs after particularly long shifts. Some nights she soaked in Epsom salt baths and wondered if she could keep going. But then Miguel would call, excited about a project or a professor's praise, and Sarah found the strength to continue. Miguel never fully understood the extent of his mother's sacrifices. Sarah made sure of that. She never complained about her tiredness or mentioned the bills that kept her awake at night. When Miguel asked if she needed money, Sarah always smiled and told him to focus on his studies. She was determined that her son's education would never be compromised by financial worries that were hers to bear alone. As the years passed, Sarah watched Miguel mature into a remarkable young man. He maintained excellent grades while working part-time jobs on campus. He called home every week, sharing stories about his classes and friends. During summer breaks, he returned home and took construction jobs, insisting on contributing to household expenses despite Sarah's protests. Miguel often spoke about his mother's strength and sacrifice to his college friends. He would tell them about the woman who raised him single-handedly, who worked tirelessly to provide opportunities she had never had herself. His friends were impressed by his dedication to his studies and his obvious love for his mother. Miguel made it clear that everything he achieved was built on the foundation of his mother's unwavering support. Now, on graduation morning, Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions coursing through her. Pride dominated everything else, but underneath lay exhaustion, relief, and a hint of uncertainty about what came next. For 22 years, her entire existence had revolved around ensuring Miguel's success. With him about to launch into his own independent life, Sarah wasn't entirely sure who she was supposed to be anymore. She had never remarried, never pursued her own dreams beyond supporting Miguel's. The military benefits had helped with some medical expenses and provided modest educational assistance that she had never used. Sarah had always planned to return to school someday, perhaps study business or nursing, but someday had never arrived. There had always been another bill to pay, another shift to work, another way to help Miguel succeed. As Sarah prepared for the graduation ceremony, she thought about the tattoo hidden beneath her dress sleeve. The military insignia mark her service and sacrifice during some of the most challenging years of her life. She rarely thought about it anymore, having grown accustomed to keeping that part of her past private. The tattoo represented a chapter she had closed, focusing instead on the present demands of single motherhood. The graduation ceremony was scheduled to begin at 10 in the morning at the university's football stadium. Sarah had received her invitation weeks ago and had immediately requested the day off from both of her jobs. This was a moment she wouldn't miss for anything in the world. She had purchased her dress specifically for this occasion, choosing navy blue because it reminded her of the pride and dignity she had felt wearing her military uniform years ago. Sarah gathered her purse and car keys, taking one last look around her small apartment. The space was modest but clean and comfortable. Every piece of furniture had been carefully chosen for both function and affordability. The walls displayed Miguel's achievements, academic awards, scholarship certificates, and photos from various milestones throughout his educational journey. The drive to the university campus took 45 minutes through morning traffic. Sarah had made this trip countless times over the past 4 years, visiting Miguel or attending various campus events. She knew every turn and landmark along the way. Today, however, the familiar route felt different. This would likely be her final trip as a college parent. The realization brought both sadness and anticipation. Sarah arrived at the campus early and found parking in a lot several blocks from the stadium. She didn't mind the walk. It gave her time to collect her thoughts and prepare for the emotional ceremony ahead. The campus was bustling with families, all dressed in their finest clothes, carrying flowers and cameras to commemorate this important milestone. As she walked toward the stadium, Sarah observed other parents and families. Many appeared to be couples, well-dressed and confident, chatting easily about their children's accomplishments and future plans. Sarah felt a momentary pang of loneliness, wishing she had someone to share this moment with, someone who understood the magnitude of what she and Miguel had accomplished together. But the feeling passed quickly replaced by the steady confidence that had carried her through 22 years of single parenthood. She had made countless sacrifices and overcome numerous obstacles to reach this day. Miguel's graduation represented not just his achievement, but their shared victory over circumstances that could have destroyed their dreams. The football stadium was impressive, with towering stands and a large field set up with hundreds of chairs for the graduating students. Banners and decorations in the university colors created a festive atmosphere. Sarah found her assigned seat in the family section and settled in to wait for the ceremony to begin. Around her, families chatted excitedly, comparing stories about their graduating children and sharing contact information to stay in touch. Sarah listened politely to nearby conversations, but remained focused on scanning the field for any sign of Miguel among the gathering graduates. The morning sun grew warmer as more families filled the stadium. Sarah removed the light cardigan she had worn over her dress, revealing the short sleeves and, unknowingly, a portion of the military tattoo on her upper arm. The design was subtle, but unmistakable to anyone familiar with military insignia. As the ceremony preparation continued, Sarah lost herself in memories of Miguel's journey. She remembered his first day of kindergarten, when he had clung to her leg, afraid to enter the classroom. She recalled his excitement when he learned to read, spending hours sounding out words in library books. She thought about his high school graduation, when he had dedicated his valedictorian speech to his mother, bringing tears to her eyes. Each memory reinforced the magnitude of this moment. Miguel had overcome every challenge placed before him, excelling academically while maintaining his kind heart and strong character. Sarah knew that his success would open doors that had been closed to previous generations of their family. He would have opportunities she could never have imagined for herself. The ceremony was about to begin, and Sarah felt her heart beating with anticipation. Somewhere among the hundreds of graduates preparing to walk across the stage was her son, ready to receive the diploma that represented years of hard work and sacrifice. This moment belonged to both of them, a testament to what could be achieved through love, determination, and unwavering commitment to a dream that had once seemed impossible. The processional music began to play as hundreds of graduates filed into the stadium wearing their black caps and gowns. Sarah stood with the rest of the audience, scanning the sea of young faces for Miguel. Her heart swelled with emotion as she spotted him in the engineering section, walking with the confident stride she had watched develop over the years. Miguel caught sight of his mother in the stands and raised his hand in a subtle wave. Even from a distance, Sarah could see his brilliant smile. He looked so handsome and dignified in his graduation attire, the tassel on his cap swaying as he walked to his designated seat. Sarah waved back, blinking away tears of joy and pride. The ceremony proceeded with speeches from university officials and a distinguished alumnus who had achieved remarkable success in the business world. Sarah listened politely, but found herself studying Miguel's face instead, memorizing this moment when her little boy officially became a college graduate and prepared to enter the professional world. During the keynote address about pursuing dreams and making a positive impact on society, Sarah reflected on how perfectly the speaker's words applied to Miguel's journey. Her son had always possessed an innate desire to build things that would help people and improve communities. Even as a young child, Miguel had constructed elaborate structures with building blocks and announced his intention to become an engineer. Sarah remembered the day Miguel had explained his senior capstone project to her over the phone. He had spent months designing a water filtration system for rural communities, working with professors and fellow students to create something both practical and affordable. His excitement as he described the technical details had filled Sarah with tremendous pride. Even though she didn't fully understand all the engineering concept he enthusiastically explained. The academic awards portion of the ceremony began, recognizing students who had achieved particular distinction during their college careers. Sarah wasn't surprised when Miguel's name was called as a recipient of the Outstanding Achievement in Civil Engineering Award. She stood and applauded as her son walked across the stage to receive the special recognition, her heart nearly bursting with pride. As Miguel accepted his award, Sarah noticed other families around her expressing admiration for the young man's accomplishment. She overheard one father comment to his wife about the impressive list of achievements the presenter had rattled off when introducing Miguel. Sarah smiled quietly, knowing that the public accolades only scratched the surface of her son's true character and determination. The individual degree presentations finally began, with graduates called alphabetically by their academic departments. Sarah knew she would have to wait quite a while before reaching the M section of engineering graduates, but she didn't mind. Every moment of this ceremony represented the culmination of dreams and sacrifices that had shaped both their lives for more than 2 decades. While waiting for Miguel's name to be called, Sarah observed the diverse group of families celebrating around her. She saw parents who had clearly achieved significant financial success, dressed in expensive clothing, and discussing their children's job offers at prestigious companies. She noticed immigrant families whose joy and pride transcended any language barriers as they watched their children become the first college graduates in their family histories. Sarah felt a deep connection with these other parents, regardless of their backgrounds or circumstances. They all shared the universal experience of watching their children reach a milestone that represented hope, opportunity, and the promise of a better future. The sacrifices might have been different, but the love and pride were exactly the same. A military family sitting several rows ahead caught Sarah's attention. The father wore his dress uniform, decorated with ribbons and insignia that spoke of years of dedicated service. His wife held a small flag, and their son was graduating with a degree in computer science. Sarah felt a kinship with this family, understanding the unique challenges military families faced and the strength required to maintain stability while serving their country. As she watched the military father proudly photograph his graduating son, Sarah unconsciously touched the area where her own military tattoo remained hidden beneath her dress sleeve. That part of her life felt distant now, overshadowed by the immediate demands of single motherhood and civilian employment. Yet the discipline, resilience, and sense of duty she had learned in the military had undoubtedly shaped her approach to raising Miguel. Sarah's military service had been brief but intense. She had enlisted at 18, drawn by the opportunity for training, education benefits, and the chance to serve something larger than herself. The experience had been both challenging and transformative, teaching her leadership skills, technical knowledge, and mental toughness that proved invaluable in civilian life. Her deployment overseas had been particularly formative. Sarah had served as a communications specialist in a forward operating base, responsible for maintaining critical radio and satellite connections between military units. The work required precision, reliability, and the ability to perform under extreme pressure. Sarah had excelled at her duties, earning commendations from her commanding officers and the respect of her fellow service members. The hardest part of military life had been the separation from Miguel during her deployment. He had stayed with Sarah's aunt in Texas while she served overseas, and the months apart had been agonizing for both mother and child. Sarah had called whenever possible, reading bedtime stories over scratchy phone connections and trying to maintain their close bond despite the distance and danger of her assignment. Miguel had been too young to fully understand why his mother had to go away, but he had been incredibly brave throughout the separation. Sarah's aunt had sent regular updates and photos documenting Miguel's growth and development during those crucial months. When Sarah finally returned home, Miguel had been initially shy but quickly warmed up to his mother's embraces and undivided attention. The transition out of military service had been more difficult than Sarah had anticipated. The structured environment, clear objectives, and strong sense of purpose that defined military life didn't easily translate to the civilian world. Sarah had struggled to find employment that utilized her technical skills and leadership experience, eventually taking whatever jobs were available to support herself and Miguel. Despite the challenges of readjusting to civilian life, Sarah never regretted her military service. The experience had given her confidence, discipline, and a broader perspective on the world that enriched her approach to parenting and problem-solving. She had learned to remain calm under pressure, think strategically about long-term goals, and maintain hope even when circumstances seemed overwhelming. The values Sarah had learned in the military became the foundation for the lessons she taught Miguel throughout his childhood. She emphasized the importance of integrity, hard work, and service to others. She encouraged him to set ambitious goals and develop the persistence necessary to achieve them. Most importantly, she demonstrated through her own actions that obstacles could be overcome through determination and creative thinking. Miguel had absorbed these lessons without always recognizing their source. He approached his studies with the same methodical dedication his mother had applied to her military duties. He treated his classmates and professors with the respect and consideration that reflected Sarah's emphasis on honor and integrity. His desire to use his engineering skills to help others echoed the service-oriented values that had originally drawn Sarah to military enlistment. As the graduation ceremony continued, Sarah found herself thinking about the future with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. Miguel had already secured an excellent position with a prominent engineering firm, beginning work just 2 weeks after graduation. His starting salary would be more than Sarah had ever earned in her best year, a testament to the value of the education they had both sacrificed so much to obtain. With Miguel's financial independence assured, Sarah would finally have the opportunity to pursue her own delayed dreams. She had always harbored a secret desire to return to school herself, perhaps studying business administration or nursing. The military education benefits she had never used were still available, and for the first time in decades, Sarah could imagine focusing on her own goals rather than solely supporting Miguel's ambitions. The prospect of returning to school at her age felt both thrilling and terrifying. Sarah would be significantly older than most traditional students, and she worried about her ability to keep up with coursework after so many years away from academic life. Yet the same determination that had carried her through military service and single parenthood remained strong, ready to be applied to new challenges and opportunities. Sarah also contemplated the possibility of exploring new relationships for the first time since Miguel's father had left them. She had deliberately avoided romantic entanglements during Miguel's childhood, focusing all her energy on providing stability and support for her son. Now, with Miguel launched into his own independent life, Sarah wondered if she might find someone who could appreciate her strength, experience, and the unique perspective she had gained through her journey. The thought of dating again felt strange and intimidating after so many years of single life. Sarah had grown accustomed to making all decisions independently and managing every aspect of their household without consultation or compromise. She wasn't even sure what kind of partner might be compatible with someone who had lived such an unconventional and challenging life. But these concerns felt distant and manageable compared to the immediate joy of watching Miguel achieve his dreams. Whatever the future held for Sarah personally, this moment represented the successful completion of the most important mission of her life. She had raised a son who was prepared to make positive contributions to the world, armed with excellent education, strong character, and the confidence that comes from being truly loved and supported. The announcer's voice brought Sarah's attention back to the present as the ceremony reached the engineering graduates. Her pulse quickened as they moved through the alphabet, approaching Miguel's name. When she heard Miguel Antonio Martinez, Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering, magna cum laude, Sarah stood and applauded with every ounce of energy in her body. Miguel walked across the stage with dignity and grace, pausing to shake hands with the university president and accept his diploma. Even from her distance in the stands, Sarah could see the emotions playing across his face as he achieved the goal they had both worked toward for so many years. This was their moment of triumph, shared across the space between the stage and her seat in the family section. After the ceremony concluded and The graduates had thrown their caps into the air in celebration. Families began making their way down to the field to find their newly minted college graduates. Sarah moved with the crowd, her eyes scanning the sea of black gowns for Miguel's familiar face. The stadium buzzed with excitement as graduates embraced their families and posed for countless photographs. Sarah spotted Miguel near the engineering section gathering area, surrounded by several classmates and their families. As she approached, she could hear him talking enthusiastically with a fellow graduate about their upcoming jobs and the projects they hope to work on. His face was glowing with happiness and accomplishment, and Sarah felt her heart swell with maternal pride. "Mom," Miguel called out when he saw her approaching. He broke away from his group and ran toward her, his graduation gown billowing behind him. Sarah opened her arms wide and caught her son in a fierce embrace that communicated years of love, struggle, and shared dreams. They held each other tightly, both fighting back tears of joy and relief. "I'm so proud of you, Mijo," Sarah whispered in Miguel's ear, using the Spanish endearment that had been her special name for him since childhood. "You did it. You really did it." Miguel pulled back slightly to look at his mother's face, his own eyes bright with emotion. "We did it, Mom. None of this would have been possible without everything you sacrificed for me. You're the strongest person I know, and I'm going to spend my whole career trying to make you proud." Sarah cupped her son's face in her hands, studying the features that had evolved from boyish sweetness to masculine strength over the years. "You already make me proud every single day, just by being the good man you've become. That's worth more than any degree or job or accomplishment." Miguel introduced his mother to several classmates and their families, speaking with obvious pride about the woman who had raised him single-handedly. Sarah was gracious and warm with the other parents, genuinely interested in their children's achievements and future plans. She could see why Miguel had thrived in this environment, surrounded by intelligent, motivated young people and their supportive families. One of Miguel's professors approached their group, recognizing several of his graduating students. Dr. Patterson was a distinguished civil engineer who had mentored Miguel throughout his senior capstone project and had become something of a father figure during his college years. The elderly professor had specifically sought out Miguel and his mother after the ceremony. "Mrs. Martinez," Dr. Patterson said warmly, extending his hand to Sarah. "I've been looking forward to meeting the remarkable woman who raised such an exceptional young man. Miguel has told me so much about your sacrifices and support throughout his education." Sarah shook the professor's hand, feeling slightly overwhelmed by his praise. "Thank you, Dr. Patterson. Miguel has mentioned you many times over the past year. I understand you've been incredibly helpful with his project work and career guidance. Miguel is one of the most dedicated and talented students I've encountered in 30 years of teaching," Dr. Patterson continued. "But more importantly, he's a young man of outstanding character. That doesn't happen by accident. You should be extremely proud of the job you've done raising him." Sarah felt tears threatening again at the professor's kind words. Throughout Miguel's childhood, she had often worried that she wasn't enough, that the absence of a father and their financial struggles were somehow shortchanging her son's development. To hear this respected educator confirm that Miguel had indeed grown into the man she had hoped he would become felt like the ultimate validation of her efforts. As they talked with Dr. Patterson and other faculty members, Sarah noticed Miguel's obvious comfort and confidence in these academic surroundings. He discussed engineering concepts with ease and passion, clearly having found his calling in this challenging field. Sarah might not understand all the technical details he enthusiastically explained, but she could see that her son belonged in this world of problem-solving and innovation. The post-ceremony celebration continued for nearly 2 hours as families mingled, took photographs, and shared refreshments provided by the university. Sarah met many of Miguel's friends for the first time, young people who had become important parts of his college experience. She was struck by their obvious affection and respect for her son, and several mentioned how often Miguel had spoken about his mother's strength and sacrifices. As the afternoon grew later, families began dispersing to continue their celebrations at restaurants and private gatherings. Miguel had made dinner reservations at a nice restaurant downtown, his treat for his mother on this special day. Sarah had initially protested the expense, but Miguel insisted that after 4 years of sending him care packages and support, she deserved to be taken out for a proper celebration. They were preparing to leave the stadium when Sarah realized she needed to visit the restroom before the drive to dinner. Miguel pointed her toward the nearest facilities and said he would wait by the main exit. Sarah made her way through the thinning crowd, still wearing the dress that had concealed her military tattoo throughout the day. The afternoon sun had grown quite warm, and many people were removing jackets and sweaters as they prepared to leave the stadium. Sarah had rolled up her sleeves slightly during the outdoor reception, unconsciously revealing more of her upper arm than she typically displayed in public settings. The military insignia tattoo, though faded somewhat with age, remained clearly visible to anyone familiar with such markings. As Sarah walked across the stadium concourse toward the restrooms, she passed a group of men in military dress uniforms who had apparently attended the ceremony to watch family members graduate. Their formal attire and bearing immediately caught Sarah's attention, triggering memories of her own service years that she rarely allowed herself to revisit. One of the uniformed men was a Marine officer, distinguished by his dress blue uniform with its distinctive red and gold details. He appeared to be in his 40s, with salt and pepper hair and the confident posture that spoke of years of military leadership. He was engaged in conversation with 2 other service members when he happened to glance in Sarah's direction as she walked past their group. The Marine officer's eyes fixed on Sarah's exposed tattoo, and his expression changed dramatically. His conversation stopped mid-sentence as he stared at the military insignia on her arm, his face reflecting a mixture of recognition, surprise, and something else Sarah couldn't immediately identify. The other officers noticed their colleague's sudden distraction and followed his gaze towards Sarah. Sarah became aware that the uniformed men were staring at her and felt a moment of self-consciousness. She glanced down at her arm and realized that her rolled-up sleeve had revealed her military tattoo. For a moment, she considered pulling her sleeve down to cover the marking, but something in the Marine officer's expression stopped her. The officer took a step towards Sarah, his face now showing clear recognition mixed with what appeared to be deep emotion. His colleagues looked puzzled by his reaction, but remained respectfully silent as he approached the woman who had captured his attention so completely. "Excuse me, ma'am," the Marine officer said politely, his voice carrying the authority and respect that characterized military communication. "I couldn't help but notice your tattoo. Were you by any chance stationed at FOB Apache in Iraq during Operation Iraqi Freedom?" Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. FOB Apache was indeed where she had been stationed during her deployment, serving as a communications specialist in one of the most dangerous regions of the country. Very few people in her civilian life knew any details about her military service, and she certainly hadn't expected to encounter someone at Miguel's graduation who might have served in the same location. "Yes," Sarah replied quietly, her voice carrying a slight tremor of surprise. "I was there from 2003 to 2004 with the 25th Signal Battalion." "How did you know I know you from somewhere?" The Marine officer's expression became even more intense, his eyes studying Sarah's face as if trying to reconcile the woman before him with a memory from nearly 20 years in the past. The other uniformed men moved closer, clearly sensing that something significant was happening, but uncertain about the nature of the connection their colleague had apparently discovered. "Sergeant Martinez," the Marine officer said slowly, his voice filled with unmistakable recognition and emotion. "Sarah Martinez. You probably don't remember me, but I certainly remember you. I'm Colonel James Harrison, but I was Lieutenant Harrison when we served together at Apache." Sarah's mind raced as she tried to place the name and face. The years had changed them both, adding lines and gray hair that made immediate recognition difficult. But as she studied his features and listened to his voice, fragments of memory began surfacing from that intense and dangerous period of her life. FOB Apache had been a small, forward operating base in a highly contested area where different military units worked closely together under constant threat of attack. The Marines, Army, and other service branches had shared resources, intelligence, and support in ways that created unusually close bonds between personnel who might never have interacted under normal circumstances. Lieutenant Harrison, Sarah repeated, the name triggering more specific memories. You were with a Marine unit that provided security for our communications operations. I remember now. You used to check on our equipment bunker during the night shifts. Colonel Harrison nodded, his expression showing both relief at her recognition and something deeper that Sarah couldn't quite interpret. That's right. But it's not just the routine security checks I remember about you, Sergeant Martinez. There's something much more significant that I've never forgotten. The other military officers exchanged glances, clearly aware that their colleague was experiencing some kind of profound moment, but uncertain whether they should remain present for what appeared to be becoming a deeply personal conversation. Sarah felt equally uncertain about where this unexpected encounter might be leading. I'm not sure I understand, Sarah said carefully, her mind still sorting through memories from her deployment that she had deliberately kept buried for many years. That was such a chaotic time, with so many people coming and going. I'm afraid I don't remember all the specific details from back then. Colonel Harrison took a deep breath, as if preparing to share something he had carried with him for nearly 2 decades. His expression showed a mixture of gratitude, respect, and emotional intensity that suggested whatever memory he was about to share had profound significance for him. September 15th, 2003, he said quietly. Do you remember that date, Sergeant Martinez? Sarah's heart stopped as the specific date hit her like a physical blow. September 15th, 2003. She would never forget that night as long as she lived. It had been the darkest, most terrifying experience of her entire deployment, and she had buried the memories so deeply that she rarely allowed them to surface even in her private thoughts. Oh my God, Sarah whispered, her face going pale as the full weight of recognition crashed over her. The mortar attack. You were the Marine lieutenant who was trapped in the collapsed bunker. Colonel Harrison's eyes filled with tears as he nodded slowly. And you were the Army communications specialist who refused to leave me behind. You crawled into that unstable rubble pile 3 different times to establish radio contact and coordinate my rescue, even when your own commanding officer ordered you to evacuate to safety. The memory came flooding back with crystal clarity now. Sarah remembered the terrifying sound of incoming mortar rounds, the explosion that had partially collapsed the Marine security bunker, and the frantic radio chatter as personnel tried to account for all soldiers in the compound. When it became clear that Lieutenant Harrison was trapped but alive under the debris, standard protocol would have called for waiting until morning when heavy equipment could safely extract him. But Sarah had known that waiting might mean the young lieutenant would die from his injuries or from additional enemy attacks during the night. She had grabbed her portable radio equipment and crawled into the unstable wreckage, determined to maintain communication with the trapped Marine and guide rescue efforts in real time. I remember how calm your voice was over the radio. Colonel Harrison continued, his voice thick with emotion. I was hurt and scared and convinced I was going to die in that hole. But you kept talking to me, keeping me conscious, telling me about your little boy back home, and making me promise to help you plan his 4th birthday party when we both got out of there safely. Sarah's own eyes filled with tears as she recalled those endless hours in the darkness. She had indeed talked about Miguel throughout the night, sharing stories about his curiosity and sweetness to keep both herself and the trapped lieutenant focused on life and hope rather than fear and despair. It had been her way of staying connected to what mattered most while dealing with the immediate crisis. You saved my life that night, Harrison said quietly. Not just by coordinating the rescue, but by keeping me conscious and fighting when I wanted to give up. The medic said later that if I had lost consciousness from blood loss, I probably wouldn't have survived until they could dig me out. Sarah shook her head, overwhelmed by the intensity of this unexpected reunion. "I was just doing my job. Any of us would have done the same thing. We didn't leave people behind." "That's not true, and you know it," Harrison replied firmly. "Your commanding officer ordered you to evacuate when the second wave of mortars started coming in. You could have been court-martialed for disobeying that direct order. But you made the choice to stay and keep working, putting your own life at risk to save mine." The other military officers listening to this exchange looked stunned by the revelation of what they were witnessing. They had clearly not expected to observe a reunion between two veterans whose shared experience had been this dramatic and significant. Sarah noticed their expressions of respect and awe, which made her feel even more uncomfortable with the attention. "I never properly thank you," Harrison continued. "By the time they got me to the field hospital and then evacuated me to Germany for surgery, you had already been reassigned to a different base. I tried to find you through military channels, but the bureaucracy made it impossible to track down someone who had completed their service and returned to civilian life." Sarah struggled to process this unexpected revelation from her past. She had spent years trying to forget the trauma and intensity of her deployment, focusing instead on building a stable civilian life for herself and Miguel. To suddenly encounter someone who not only remembered those experiences, but who credited her with saving his life felt surreal and overwhelming. "I thought about that night so many times over the years," Sarah admitted quietly. "I wondered what happened to you, whether you recovered from your injuries, whether you made it home safely to your family. But after a while, it seemed better to just let those memories stay in the past." "I understand that," Harrison replied. "The transition back to civilian life isn't easy for any of us. But I want you to know that everything good that happened in my life after that night happened because of what you did. I finished my deployment, came home to my family, watched my daughters grow up, had a successful military career, and now I'm about to retire after 30 years of service. None of that would have been possible without your courage and determination." Sarah felt tears streaming down her cheeks as the full impact of this encounter settled over her. For nearly 20 years, she had carried the memories of her military service as a private burden, rarely sharing details with anyone and certainly never considering herself heroic for simply doing what needed to be done in an impossible situation. "I have 2 daughters," Harrison continued, pulling out his wallet to show Sarah a family photograph. "Jennifer graduated from law school last year, and Rebecca is finishing her medical residency. They both know the story about the Army sergeant who saved their father's life in Iraq. They've heard me tell that story hundreds of times, but I never thought I'd have the chance to introduce them to you in person." Sarah studied the photograph of Harrison's family, seeing a confident, accomplished man surrounded by beautiful, successful daughters and a woman who was clearly his wife and life partner. The image represented the life and future that her actions in that collapsed bunker had helped preserve. "They're beautiful," Sarah said softly. "You have a wonderful family. I'm so glad you made it home safely to them." "What about you?" Harrison asked. "You mentioned your little boy that night. Did you make it home safely to him?" Sarah's face lit up with maternal pride, despite her emotional state. "Yes, I did. Miguel just graduated from college today with a degree in civil engineering. He's starting his career with a prominent firm in 2 weeks. That's actually why I'm here at the university." Harrison's expression shifted to amazement and delight. "Your son graduated today? The little boy you talked about while we were trapped in that bunker is now a college graduate. Magna cum laude," Sarah added with obvious pride. "He received an award for outstanding achievement in his field. He wants to design infrastructure projects that will help communities, especially in developing areas that lack basic services like clean water and reliable transportation." Harrison shook his head in wonder. "That's incredible. The woman who saved my life raised a son who's going to spend his career saving other people through engineering solutions. There's a beautiful symmetry to that." Sarah hadn't considered this connection before, but Harrison's observation struck her as profoundly meaningful. She had indeed raised Miguel with an emphasis on service and helping others, values that had been reinforced by her own military experience and the understanding of how individual actions could have far-reaching consequences. "I'd love to meet him," Harrison said, "if that would be appropriate. I've carried the story of his mother's heroism for almost 20 years. It would mean the world to me to congratulate him on his graduation and tell him what an extraordinary woman raised him." Sarah felt a moment of uncertainty. She had never shared detailed stories about her military service with Miguel, preferring to focus on their present life rather than dwelling on experiences that felt distant and disconnected from their civilian reality. Miguel knew she had served overseas, but he didn't know about the specific incidents or the recognition she had received for her actions under fire. "He's waiting for me by the main exit," Sarah said slowly. "We were planning to go to dinner to celebrate his graduation. But I suppose if you'd like to meet him, I could introduce you." Harrison's face lit up with enthusiasm. "I would be honored. And please bring him to dinner with my family. We're celebrating my niece's graduation tonight, and it would be perfect to have all this celebration together. I insist on treating you both after everything you've done." Sarah started to protest the expense and imposition, but Harrison held up his hand to stop her objections. "Sergeant Martinez, you saved my life and asked for nothing in return. The least I can do is buy you and your son dinner to celebrate his graduation and thank you properly for what you did nearly 20 years ago." The other military officers who had been quietly observing this reunion stepped forward to introduce themselves and express their own respect for Sarah's service. They had clearly been moved by the story they had just heard and wanted to acknowledge the veteran who had demonstrated such extraordinary courage under fire. As they walked together toward the stadium exit where Miguel was waiting, Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions. The unexpected encounter with Harrison had brought back memories she had deliberately buried, but it had also provided a perspective on her military service that she had never considered. For years, she had minimized her deployment experience, focusing instead on the challenges of single motherhood and civilian employment. Now, seeing the profound impact her actions had on Harrison's life and future, Sarah began to understand that her military service represented something more significant than she had allowed herself to acknowledge. The courage and determination she had displayed in that collapsed bunker were the same qualities that had carried her through 2 decades of raising Miguel alone, working multiple jobs, and sacrificing her own dreams to ensure his success. As they approached Miguel, who was checking his phone and looking around for his mother's return, Sarah realized that this unexpected reunion was about to change how both she and her son understood their family story. The narrative of struggle and sacrifice that had defined their relationship was about to expand to include a chapter of heroism and service that Sarah had never shared. Miguel looked up as he saw his mother approaching with a group of uniformed military personnel. His expression showed curiosity and slight concern as he tried to understand why his mother appeared to have been crying and why these distinguished-looking officers were accompanying her back from what was supposed to be a simple trip to the restroom. "Mom, is everything okay?" Miguel asked with concern as Sarah approached with a group of military officers. He could see that his mother had been crying and was clearly emotional about something that had happened during her brief absence. Sarah took a deep breath, realizing that this moment would forever change how Miguel understood both her past and his own family legacy. "Miguel, I want you to meet someone very important. This is Colonel James Harrison, United States Marine Corps. We served together in Iraq many years ago." Miguel stepped forward respectfully and extended his hand to the Marine officer. "It's an honor to meet you, sir. Thank you for your service to our country." Colonel Harrison shook Miguel's hand warmly, studying the young man's face with obvious emotion. "The honor is entirely mine, son. I've been waiting nearly 20 years for the chance to meet you and tell you what an extraordinary mother you have." Miguel looked puzzled by the colonel's intense emotion and glanced at his mother for explanation. Sarah had rarely discussed specific details about her deployment, and Miguel had no idea that his mother had been involved in anything that would create such a profound connection with another veteran. "Mom," Miguel asked quietly, "what's this about?" Colonel Harrison looked at Sarah. silently asking permission to share the story. When she nodded slowly, he turned back to Miguel with an expression of deep respect and gratitude. Son, your mother saved my life in Iraq on September 15th, 2003. I was trapped in a collapsed bunker during a mortar attack, seriously injured and unable to communicate with rescue teams. Your mother crawled into that unstable wreckage 3 different times to establish radio contact and coordinate my rescue, despite direct orders to evacuate to safety. Miguel's eyes widened in shock as he looked back and forth between his mother and the Marine colonel. This was completely different from the vague references to communications work that Sarah had always provided when asked about her military service. She stayed with me for 8 hours, Harrison continued, keeping me conscious and fighting to survive by talking about you. She told me stories about your curiosity, your love of building things, how smart you were even as a 3-year-old. She made me promise to help plan your 4th birthday party when we both made it home safely. Miguel's voice was barely a whisper. Mom, you never told me any of this. You said you worked on radio equipment, not that you were in combat situations or that you saved someone's life. Sarah reached out to touch her son's arm. I didn't want you to worry about things that happened before you could even remember. I wanted to focus on building our life here, not dwelling on experiences that seemed so far from our daily reality. Colonel Harrison's colleagues stepped forward to introduce themselves to Miguel, each expressing their profound respect for his mother's service and sacrifice. Miguel shook their hands politely, but remained focused on trying to understand this revelation about his mother's past. Everything I achieved in my military career, everything good that happened in my life after that night, happened because your mother chose to risk her own life to save mine, Harrison told Miguel. I went on to serve my country for 30 years, marry my wife, raise 2 daughters who are now successful professionals, and build a life I never could have imagined. None of that would exist without your mother's courage. Miguel looked at Sarah with a mixture of awe, pride, and something approaching bewilderment. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me about this? This is incredible. You're a hero. Sarah shook her head quickly. I'm not a hero, Mijo. I was just doing my job, doing what any decent person would do in that situation. We didn't leave people behind. With respect, ma'am, one of Harrison's colleagues interjected, what you did that night went far beyond duty or job requirements. Disobeying evacuation orders to crawl into unstable debris during an active enemy attack takes extraordinary courage. That's the definition of heroic action. Miguel felt overwhelmed as he tried to reconcile this new understanding of his mother with the woman he had known his entire life. The strength, determination, and selfless dedication he had always admired in her suddenly made even more sense in the context of her military heroism. I always wondered where I got my drive to help people through engineering, Miguel said slowly. I thought it was just something that developed naturally. But now I understand it comes from you, from this example you set even before I was old enough to remember. Colonel Harrison smiled broadly. Your mother told me that night about a little boy who loved building things and wanted to make structures that would help people. Here you are, 22 years later, graduating with honors in civil engineering and planning to design infrastructure for communities that need it most. She wasn't just saving my life that night. She was protecting the future engineer who would go on to help countless others. Miguel felt tears welling up in his eyes as the full significance of this encounter settled over him. His graduation day, which had already been the culmination of years of shared sacrifice and determination, had just become something much more profound. He was learning that his family story included a legacy of heroism and service that he had never known existed. Colonel Harrison has invited us to join his family for dinner tonight, Sarah told Miguel. His niece graduated today, too, and they're celebrating at a restaurant downtown. Miguel looked at the Marine officer with newfound respect and understanding. Sir, I would be honored to have dinner with you and your family. And I hope you'll tell me more stories about my mother's service. I have a feeling there's a lot I don't know about the woman who raised me. Harrison laughed warmly. Son, I could tell stories about your mother's courage and character all night long. But I think what's most important is that you understand how proud you should be, not just of your own accomplishments today, but of the incredible woman who made them possible. As they prepare to leave the stadium together, Miguel walked beside his mother with a new awareness of who she really was. The woman who had worked multiple jobs, sacrificed her own dreams, and supported his education through sheer determination was the same person who had risked her life to save a fellow service member in a war zone halfway around the world. "Mom," Miguel said quietly as they walked toward the parking area, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. How many other stories are there? How many other things did you do during your service that you never told me about?" Sarah considered the question carefully. There were other incidents, other times when we had to make difficult choices under dangerous circumstances. But, Miguel, I never wanted those experiences to define our relationship or overshadow the life we were building together. I wanted to be your mother first, not a war veteran carrying baggage from the past. Miguel stopped walking and turned to face his mother directly. "But don't you see? This doesn't change who you are to me. It makes me understand why you are who you are. The strength you showed raising me alone, the way you never gave up no matter how hard things got, the values you taught me about helping others, and never leaving anyone behind, it all comes from this. You're not carrying baggage, you're carrying honor." Colonel Harrison, who had been listening to their conversation, nodded in agreement. "Your son is absolutely right, Sergeant Martinez. What you did in Iraq, what you did raising him alone, what you're still doing every day, it's all part of the same story. You're a woman of extraordinary character who makes difficult choices to protect and serve others. That's worth celebrating, not hiding." As they reached the parking area, Harrison pulled out his business card and handed it to Miguel. "I'm retiring from active duty next month, but I want to stay in touch with both of you. Your mother gave me my life back, and watching you achieve your dreams feels like witnessing the continuation of that gift." Miguel studied the card, noting the impressive list of credentials and commendations listed after Harrison's name. "Sir, I like to stay in touch too, and I hope someday I can introduce you to the structures I build, the projects I work on to help communities. I think you'll be proud to see how your rescue led to things that help other people." The two men shook hands again, this time with the understanding that they shared a connection that would last for years to come. Sarah watched the interaction with deep emotion, realizing that this unexpected reunion had not only honored her past service, but had also given Miguel a new understanding of his own family legacy. As they made plans to meet for dinner and exchange contact information, Sarah felt a profound shift in how she viewed her own life story. For 20 years, she had compartmentalized her military service as a separate chapter that had little relevance to her role as Miguel's mother. Now she understood that her courage, dedication, and selfless service were threads that ran through every aspect of her life. The woman who had crawled into a collapsed bunker to save a fellow service member was the same woman who had worked 3 jobs to pay for her son's education, who had sacrificed her own dreams to ensure his success, who had never given up despite overwhelming challenges. Her heroism wasn't confined to a single night in Iraq. It was woven into the fabric of everything she had accomplished as a single mother. Miguel linked his arm through his mother's as they walked toward her car, his graduation cap still in his free hand. "Mom, I want you to promise me something. When I start my new job and get settled in my career, I want you to think about what you want to do next. Maybe go back to school. Maybe pursue some of those dreams you put aside for me. You've spent 22 years making sure I could achieve my goals. Now it's time for you to achieve yours." Sarah looked at her son, seeing in his face the same determination and integrity that had carried them both through the challenges of the past 2 decades. "I promise I'll think about it, Mijo. Maybe it's time for both of us to start new chapters." As they drove away from the university campus toward dinner with Colonel Harrison and his family, Sarah realized that her graduation gift to Miguel had unexpectedly become a gift to herself as well. In reconnecting with her military past and finally sharing that hidden chapter of her life with her son, she had reclaimed a part of herself that she had buried beneath the demands of single motherhood. The tattoo on her arm, which had accidentally revealed itself that afternoon, no longer felt like a mark to hide. It was a symbol of honor, courage, and service that connected her past heroism with her ongoing dedication to the people she loved. Today had been Miguel's graduation day, but in many ways, it marked a new beginning for both of them.